My name is Junot Díaz. I am a writer, novelist, and an essayist, and I'm a professor at MIT, where we first met.
That's right. And my name is Arthur Musah. I'm the director of Brief Tender Light, a feature documentary that follows four African students through the American college experience at MIT.
Well, Arthur, I have to tell you, um, both, of course, from the experience of um, being a sort of an immigrant who also went to college, who also had um, enormous family expectations. I found myself really struck by the documentary, and I think beyond just the kind of really deep personal connection, the film itself continually transforms as we're watching it. It's an extraordinary document. There's nothing about that opening that prepares us for either the journey or the kind of intellectual and emotional resonance. Um, so the question for me is always when I think about this film, and again, I rewatched it again earlier today, was how aware were you that this thing was going to be an emergent text? And did it surprise you as much as I think people like me, your audience, are surprised?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Juno, for those kind words. The film did surprise me in many ways as well. When I set out to make it, I had just left film school and I wanted to make a film out in the real world. And I felt like creating a film about the international student journey, specifically from the African point of view, something I had lived through, would be a fresh contribution to cinema because I hadn't seen that story told. And I thought it would take about 4 years to complete, 4 years to shoot, from beginning to the end of graduation, and then a year to edit. But obviously, it took us 13 years to finish. And it was, in a way, a happy accident because we continued filming and my understanding of the project kind of evolved. The edit took about 5 years on and off with multiple people contributing to it. And in the process, things were happening in the world, in my home, that also forced me to deepen my understanding of what the film could be and should be in responding to sort of the times that we're living in.
No, no, it's sort of kind of remarkable. And I think, as you said, uh, one of the things that ends up happening, and I think you see this in multiple places, you know this better than anyone, is how often sort of this umbrella, the rubric of the immigrant just demolishes all particularity. And then, of course, in the African diaspora, how often, certain populations just get not only just fused together, but even get conscripted into kind of African American narratives,
Hmm.
without giving them the due and the particularity. Um, how did you think about that? Because this one really teases out what is really unique, even as it speaks to the commonalities.
I think the the beautiful thing that happened was really in quote unquote the casting process. I would call it the finding of the collaborators, basically the four participants that we follow in the film, the four main participants whose lives they share as it happens in real time. And I kind of wanted to, I wanted to work with people coming directly from the African continent to start at MIT and follow them from the very first day they arrive until graduation. Obviously, the film follows them a little bit post-graduation, which was a happy accident. But in that process, I was paying attention to who was an excited and willing collaborator. And there was a happy accident that happened in that we had a diversity of backgrounds. First of all, the four participants come from different countries. So Sante is a young woman from Tanzania. is from Nigeria and maybe from northern Nigeria, which we're not as familiar with. I think often when people think about Nigeria, it's the south, Lagos mostly, that we hear about, and he's from Kano. Then there's a young man, Billy, from Rwanda, and then Fidelis, another young man from Zimbabwe. So they come from different socioeconomic backgrounds, from different parts of the African continent. They each have a very specific drive, even though their drive is sort of to make that chance of education at an elite college to make it count for home. Each of them has a very specific flavor of that. And with the openness with which they shared with my camera and with their own video diaries, with the project, they allowed us to get a very specific and very multi-layered story about what young African immigrants on this journey in the US through the college experience and beyond are thinking of, what makes them tick, what the experiences are like, and allowed us also to see how those journeys intersect with other stories that we've heard. Things like, the civil rights struggle in the US. My own story in the film allows us to touch on queer rights across the globe, and so on and so forth. So I really think it's within that collaboration of working with these four participants who shared so generously of their lives that we find a very rich story to kind of weave in post-production.
No, it's completely operatic. Like I just sort of extraordinary how the elegance of its economy. And it's like there's so many different angles approached because first of all, MIT, is its own tale. It's like getting into, Hogswort. It's this kind of other thing. And of course, oh, here comes this letter. And then of course there's just the worlds that are being crossed here. And I mean, again, it was really remarkable, the sort of a visual economy. I mean, were you working very closely with with the kind of the shot selections with your participants, or was that happening over a long period of time during the editing? Were you asking for certain views? How is this all being framed? Because when you look at it, there's just this remarkable organic poetry, and I can't help but think, my God, is this the force of an individual or two individuals, or is this just the confluence of just a bunch of remarkable people coming together?
Yeah, I would say it's the beauty of collaboration. Pardon me. Um, I I wanted to explore this question of, can youthful idealism survive growing up? Because it's a question I had wrestled with in my own journey of coming to the US, attending MIT, thinking, um, surely that journey had to count for home being Ghana, which is where I'd grown up from age 3 until 19. Um, and, years after, when I found myself in the US, that was a question that was constantly on my mind, that was constantly within the conversations that my cohort of Africans who had gone to study at various colleges in the US around the time I had, those were conversations we were having. And so, making this film was a way to explore that. But really, I would say the magic happened within that collaboration. So I filmed the footage myself, the principal photography, so to speak. So in most of the situations, it's my camera is the main camera. But then an important part of the film is also the video diaries that the four participants kept. And so they allowed us to provide a different lens on that experience, a little bit more of actually, one of the things I noticed was the video diaries captured aspects of who they were that perhaps I didn't have access to with my camera, even though over time we'd become friends and we'd become comfortable with each other to the point where, sometimes, a lot of the times we're breaking that fourth wall. The film participants weren't quote unquote playing nice film subjects. They would ask me questions across the fourth wall, across the lens, and kind of pull me into it, all the way to the point of, Fidelis at some point in the film actually grabs the camera and starts filming me.
A remarkable moment.
Yeah. And so it's really, there's a beauty in the footage I film, but also a complementary beauty in the video diaries that they boldly shared, because we got to see aspects of intimate aspects of their journey that I would not have had access to. And obviously, the final part of the collaboration is the edit team. As I mentioned before, the edit took 5 years to complete, and for
Oof.
multiple reasons. We went through a number of edit teams, we'd run out of funding and then kind of find some more, outstep and edit for a while, raise some more money, and then hire somebody else. And it was in that process that, the idea of including voiceover, including my story kind of came up as well. And that formed another element of the film in the end.
Yeah, no, I mean it's really sort of remarkable because the the kind of not only the of course the diversity of these young people, but the remarkable intimacy. I mean, it's so hard, you know better than I, to capture interiority in film, whether we're speaking of documentary or we're speaking sort of kind of the fictional films. And there's a lot of ache that goes into this story. I mean, an enormous amount of not just, as you described, struggle, but of great, great longing, whether it's longing for a relationship with the future country, whether it's sort of a sense of their family, that they feel that they've not only feel that they've lost so much of in this process, and this kind of question that you return to again and again, which is what survives this translation? Can family survive? Can our sense of ourselves, say, as Ghanaian or our homeland, can that survive? As you said, this youthful idealism ends up being this arc in which all of these different questions, and even can, our vision for a sense of self that is uncomplicated, that sort of is a home, all of this gets raised and really just, I don't think this this has gotten enough credit for how just remarkable a a presentation it is. And therefore, I keep thinking about the intimacy of the work, even as you're wrestling with these enormous issues. How was it juggling those two? Because
Mm.
there's so much on the table.
Yes. So the intimacy part, again, I have to credit the four participants who went on this remarkable journey with me. Their boldness in sharing both the joys but the challenging aspects of their lives. I think, we worked together to understand what the project I was chasing was, and then what their comfort level was with sharing different aspects of their lives. And it was a constant conversation. Are you comfortable including this? Are you comfortable including that? And then there was this trust of, well, if I give you this, there's a certain way in which it would be presented that resonates or rings true to who the participants are. And so I think part of the length of the edit, so to speak, was kind of honing in on taking all this material, footage shot in 5 countries, right? The US and Tanzania and Rwanda, Zimbabwe and Nigeria. And over all these years, footage I shot, the video diaries, some archival news footage that ultimately made it in there to kind of weave it into that. I'd also say Kelly Creedon, the final editor on the project, kind of helped create this safe space where I could experiment with my writing and with opening up. Because after years of working on the film, and then it finally clicked to me how my own story made sense in there. It had been something that had been suggested at multiple phases of the edit, the possibility of including my own story in the film. There were multiple reasons. One would be the economy of kind of providing exposition to kind of keep the story going, given that we had so much to cover. But it felt like on its own wasn't enough of a reason to include myself because I never really, you know, filmic as a character being sort of an omniscient narrator that knows it all didn't feel right for this particular film and for how we had shot it with the participants. And so I was looking for a way, if I was going to be in the film, to sort of be with the participants exploring these questions and figuring out or trying to wrestle with these questions and find answers to them kind of on the same level. And so it really was in 2021, Ghana introduced an anti-LGBT bill, basically a hate bill that would criminalize queer existence and allyship, which still is on the verge of making it into law, unfortunately. And it was when that happened that I realized my story as a gay man from Ghana who now lives in the US belonged in the film. And so I had to sort of match the vulnerability and intimacy that the four participants had shared with my camera all those years by also opening up and sharing my own life. And so together with Kelly Creedon, we created this space where I could explore opening up and writing in a way that complemented the intimacy and vulnerability of the four main participants in the film.
It's sort of just kind of as again, I was really struck by how both familiar but also bracing it was to see the ways that when we say, oh, we're coming to a new culture, oh, we're entering this sort of hegemonic space, what does it really mean? But also, what is it really challenging us, not just from a negative point of view? And in that moment where you come out to your participant, really kind of brought it all together, right? Like this is here we have a planetary dialogue
Mm.
on what we mean about tolerance, what we mean about community. It was so fraught. Were you when how did it go, man? I always wondered that moment was so deep for me since I know you and I could only imagine how was it for you, you know?
Yeah, it was it was a moment that always stood out in the footage. There were a few of those moments. There were sort of moments that felt like things that would be cut out of the film. They weren't so neat in terms of, oh, we're filming a scene. It's not a perfect scene, right? Um, but those were the moments that always kept calling attention to themselves when I was reviewing the footage, when editors would look at it and we would like talk about what resonates, right? And yeah, eventually it made sense to include that because it really was the core, actually, the messy core of the story that I was chasing about, who do you become as a result of this experience of leaving home, continents away, and then and going through this phase of growing from teenager into adult in a completely different system in a continent away, right? So there are different flavors, different pressures that happen or that apply themselves on you as you're trying to figure yourself out. And this was an example that really kind of allowed multiple things to intersect. The cultural identity, my own search for freedom, cultural identity in Fidelis, as he's navigating that, because essentially, he had the complete opposite belief about queer people, or discomfort with queer people at the beginning of the journey. So yeah, it felt like a friendship. It felt like something we were navigating together, and so it never felt threatening. It felt like a safe space to really have a lot of open and difficult conversations. And then in terms of, that actually leads me to to think about how the film was structured because it seemed to me from having gone through the college abroad experience and then watching these four participants go through it again as I was filming that you sort of start off in a mode that I'm calling a visitor, right? I think a lot of African international students specifically come to the US thinking it's just a temporary sojourn, right?
Hmm.
4 years to get a degree, and I'm here. I just need to survive the difficult parts of it, whether it's academic challenges, whether it's racism towards Black people, people of color, whether it's all the unpleasant stuff that's within the world that might be different from the space that the place that you're coming from. I just need to survive it for 4 years and then I'm out, right? And I'm taking back, as Fidel, as one of the characters in the film calls it, I'm here to milk America and kind of go back with
Yes, right at the beginning.
right. But sort of halfway through that experience, I think there's a realization that happens that it's going to have to be longer than 4 years. And I have to figure out a way to make this place a home and I have to thrive, right? I can't just survive, I have to thrive. And so there's a way in which you face those challenging parts of America that has to be different, right? Now you can't just turn a blind eye or like survive racism. Now you have to figure out a way to deal with it. How do you confront it, right? And so the second half of the film sort of charts that we see more of as wrestling with the uncomfortable parts of, our backgrounds, our current world, and then kind of navigating those and trying to find a way to bridge them.
Yeah, and what it means, the difference, it was so wild, the difference between being a son in this situation and being a daughter.
Mm, mm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I thought you did a really it's just the documentary did a fantastic job on how these expectations and when they're, when you look at them, the gendered sort of burdens was just and how one makes decisions around those burdens.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was a she was wonderful in that and very revelatory.
Absolutely. Sante was incredibly brave. I would say,
Whew.
she is somebody who I learned very quickly has no qualms about asking any question that's on her mind, challenging people on anything she's uncomfortable about. She's somebody who speaks out. She's somebody who is very good at advocating for herself. And so she's just sort of a force of nature. And it really comes through in the film, in her bravery in sharing both her lows and her highs. And I think I think there's a feminist thread in the film, absolutely, and it's subtle, but I think it's there for people to pick up. I think it was pretty true that when I travel home with each one of them, um, there was no expectation for anybody to sort of cook except
Oh, exactly.
which has two sort of I think there are a couple of things I take away from that. I mean, in one hand, that scene is really about sort of the making, the things that you used to do at home, and maybe you're no longer doing as well or the same way. But on another level, there's also this sort of unspoken expectation of gender roles. And that's something that Sante consciously, in a very subtle but powerful way, challenges over the course of the film. I think for me, the other beautiful thing about her story and the thread in that is, I think there's a stereotype that you know, yes, women expected to cook and be wives and all of that, and um, that is reinforced by all aspects of society, including parents. But then in this film, we see that when Sante asks her father, when she has that conversation with her father about staying longer away from home, that her father gives her the absolute blessing, to go ahead and do that. And so those are the little ways in which I was hoping the film would sort of challenge our ideas of African reality, and would present African people in like more complexity that we than we're used to seeing in film.
And just again, as a viewer, I mean, it is such the best professor ever because it really asks us to educate ourselves around our expectations. As you say, everyone's got this idea that we're going to have this big showdown, you know, the narrative for you when you come out, her narrative, Sante's narrative about her kind of ambivalence, you know, I feel like I need to stick around.
Mm,
The documentary defies a lot and asks us to deepen and complicate ourselves. And in that way, it's just, you know, it builds upon all of its strengths. So I got a question now. This one is just obvious, but I mean, this documentary is dropping in probably one of the most, and that's saying quite a lot to say one of the most toxic moments
mm,
in anti-immigrant politics in the United States. The incredible, vile things being said about immigrant communities. In fact, an election which seems to be in part mobilizing itself around this. Um, how how are you seeing this? How is this um, sort of giving you a new sensibility for a project that you've worked on for over a decade? Um, Something that I'm just interested in your sort of take on this.
yeah, I guess in terms of, how the film might speak to the moment, there was, while we're still in production, I had obviously lots of pitches and conversations with people. And there was one that stuck with me, excuse me, where somebody said, this film is interesting because we see international students all the time, and we see immigrants all the time in our communities. This was somebody from Europe, and but we never get to know them. And this film offers a way to get to know some international students or immigrants. And then the other thing I think the film does in terms of speaking to the moment is I was hoping really this film would celebrate, African international students, anybody who really sort of moves away from home to a new home and has to navigate the space in between those two places. And so the film, I hope, can celebrate that immigrant journey, whether immigration is within your country from one town to another or from across continents like the participants do. And then hopefully is a way for people to get to know immigrants within that they see all the time, but often don't get to know.
Yeah, no, these kind of broad, I mean, that's all of this anti-immigrant politics drives on generalities, thrives on sort of a kind of a cloud of suspicion and a cloud of just criminality. And just this sort of real kind of human, just hand to hand look, I think is just so much a remarkable and important intervention. I mean, for me, this is a documentary where we actually see the crucible of countries becoming. How does it really come together? What do we really mean when we say immigration at
Mm,
the interpersonal? What is this? What does it actually look like? And what does it actually look like at the people level, not at some political abstraction? And the impacts it has. I mean, that's one of the things that's really remarkable, how you track this just international, this planetary impact that these four journeys have. Just remarkable. And just, I think, you know, I salute you. And I know it must have felt like it was a remarkable odyssey of labor, but you've created a remarkable planetary odyssey here.
thank you. Thank you so much, Juno. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you, Arthur. Really appreciate it. Thank you. The film's extraordinary.